So, as I've been saying, welcome to everyone to tonight's monthly meeting of 350 Wisconsin. And my name is Julia Isaacs, and I'm a co-lead of the monthly meeting team. I'm going to try to moderate the evening with help from other folks and lots of behind the scenes assistance from Susan Nussel, Kelly Kearns, and Marion Friedel. And Susan, you want to share the slides so that's in slideshow view. Great. So welcome to 350 Wisconsin. Next slide. Tonight, I'm sharing a photo of two sandhill cranes flying overhead. I took this photo on December 3rd of 2 years ago. And when you look at this photo, I encourage you to reflect on the fact that sandhill cranes have been around for 2.5 million years, longer than most modern birds. So let's take 2 deep breaths together. And a second breath. And reflect on the cranes and our ties to this land. We also use this time to acknowledge the different indigenous tribes that have lived on these lands for many, 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 many years before the European settlers arrived and forcibly took over their lands. The Ho-Chunk people lived on the lands where present-day Madison is now located. And I'd like to share a very short story told by a Ho-Chunk elder about the crane migration and the relationship between the cranes, the Ho-Chunk, and the natural world. Quote, in the spring, the cranes arrive home to Wisconsin, the homeland of the Ho-Chunk people. Upon their arrival, they call out, signifying that the people should get their seeds and soil prepared for the upcoming growing season. As the warm summer days turn to the colder season of fall, the cranes prepare for their migration south, and they call out again. They remind the people to gather their black ash baskets for the corn and the squash harvest time. And I read this story on a blog post to the International Crane Foundation up near Baraboo, Wisconsin. Next slide. So we are in the land acknowledgement and welcome part of our meeting. And again, an extra warm welcome to anyone who is here for the first time. I hope you feel welcome. I do want to just say out loud that we want 350 Wisconsin's public meetings to be welcoming and supportive for all people, regardless of background or identity. So next up on our agenda, we'll break into short breakout rooms just to spend some time getting to know each other. We did this last month and people liked it, so we're going to do it again. Then we'll turn to our great speaker, Ben Austin, who will be talking about sustainability in buildings. Then we'll have some time for teams actions updates from various teams and 350 Wisconsin staff. And at the very end, we'll have time for breakouts. This will be a time when newcomers will be invited to stay in the main room for an extra welcome, and others who are interested can join the Zoom breakout for more Q&A with the speaker. Next slide. So we're going to put you in a breakout room with 4 to 5 people. They're all friendly people, so please don't get worried. Just tell them your name, where you're from, and how you're involved with 350 Wisconsin. Maybe it's your first time, maybe you've been coming for years. Maybe you're part of Team X, maybe you're staff. You know, you just share who you are. And then we have a question for you. How do you stay motivated in the face of the challenge of climate change? You know, a little small question. So I think, Marion, you're the one who's going to put us into breakout rooms, aren't you? For about 8 minutes. So
yeah, absolutely. 8 minutes. And here we go.
It looks like our breakout rooms are closing, and so we're lots of people are joining us, which is wonderful. Does anyone want to share? Anyone just unmute yourself. Want to share anything from their breakout room before we go on? How
Hi,
about a
Lisa.
reaction to breakout rooms? Oh, go ahead.
Sure. So Michael Friend here, everyone. I'll echo the sentiment from last month's meeting that was really great to have a moment to talk with people, especially I live in Illinois, so I don't often get to see people outside my team. So that was really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Okay. I think we're now ready to move on to our main item. So I want to briefly introduce Keith Fuller, who is a relatively new member of 350 Wisconsin. He got involved about a year ago as a parent concerned for the planet he's leaving his kids. He's a video game developer turned leadership consultant. And he had this idea that shouldn't we hear about sustainability from a builder perspective? And he's been moving this idea along, and he found Ben, and here it is. He's helped bring this together. So Keith, could you introduce our speaker?
Happily, yes. Thank you for the honor to do so. So maybe 2 or 3 months ago, as a result of conversations with folks in the climate solutions team, I was investigating local resources. Hey, who knows the most about sustainable building and these sorts of things? And I happened upon Ben's name as the author of a blog post on the Findorff website. And I thought, what are the chances this guy will actually have coffee with me? Ben, God bless him, leapt at the opportunity, and over the course of 1 cup of coffee gave me 10 times the amount of information that I had just the day before. He's a wealth of knowledge. You can read about him, but he's the sustainability lead at Findorff, which is a unique role. And he interfaces with all sorts of parties involved in building and design. You'll hear a ton about that. I'll let him do that introduction. So I just want to point out that he is a phenomenal source of information and a darn friendly guy and likes his coffee. So without further ado, I'll invite people to lend Ben some time, and feel free to think about some questions you might want to ask later, because we're going to have some Q&A with him. That said, take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Keith. So let's do a little audio check. Audio coming through. Great, thumbs up. How about a visual? Double thumbs up. All right, I love it. I don't have a cup of coffee next to me right now. It's too late for that, but Keith is right. I do love my coffee, and I try to be nice. So there you go. I appreciate that intro. I've got 20 minutes, and as Keith said, I'm trying to cram way too much into 20 minutes, but I think that's kind of the point here. The problems are immense, and we just need to kind of get it all out there. So these slides are going to be available afterwards. There's a lot of content on here. I intentionally threw some dense, heavy slides in here, knowing you could access it later, but I just don't have time in 20 minutes. So forgive me for that, please. But I am going to get going. So our agenda for today, I think a little level setting around who I am and kind of where I come from on the sustainability in my role is important. I think a little baseline setting on what we mean when we say sustainability is important, but I really want to spend the time today talking about emissions in buildings, and then talk about some really great case studies, and then looking ahead. And I know there'll be a lot of great conversation to follow up on after that. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Findorff, I know I'm probably speaking to people with a wide range of expertise, some in buildings and likely some not. So Findorff is a general contractor headquartered in Madison. We've been headquartered here since 1890, so in over 130 years of experience. We're a commercial general contractor, so we're a builder. We do not design buildings, we build buildings. The commercial world is somewhat siloed, maybe different from the residential space there. We have over 1,000 men and women in the field. We're signatory to 6 union trades. A lot of concrete work, a lot of masonry work, a lot of steel work. So that's a big piece of what we do. Sustainability is a really important part of that picture. There's Findorff buildings and the buildings we own and how we manage and operate them. And then really, truthfully, what drives my role and how we've really gotten a foothold in sustainability is the clients we work with and their sustainability goals, and how do we kind of meet them where they're at and deliver a sustainable project based on their definition. Oops, I'm flying all over, sorry. So just to give you a small flavor, again, we do work across a variety of different sectors. It's essentially everything except single family housing. What I find interesting is that each of these different sectors have different drivers for sustainability, right? A elementary school and a corporate office are going to have vastly different definition. And part of that's because they have different stakeholder groups, right? If I'm a school going to referendum, I need to make sure that what we're doing is in line with what the community needs are. And also, you know, some of these are for-profit, some are tax exempt. That ties into the kind of the funding stuff. And as we get into the Inflation Reduction Act and some other sources, that's an important piece of the puzzle. The other thing I wanted to ground everybody in is just, we are a contractor, we're a builder. That gives us certain opportunities, but it limits us from how we can impact a building project directly. So this graphic on the left, I stole from the link you can see there, but you think broadly, right? A location selected, there's some planning, there's some financing, and then this design and construction process happened. In the delivery methods for project, there's something called design bid build. So that's a hard bid project. So this is maybe more like public sector work where a design, an architect is hired by an owner and that building is fully designed. Every single thing is selected. After that's done, a contractor is onboarded, typically the one with the lowest bid. In that scenario, a firm like Findorff doesn't have much opportunity to impact the design and the sustainability measures. Thankfully for me, that's only about 15%, 1/5 of the work we do. The vast majority of the work we do is called negotiated. So that gets to this construction manager at risk. And as you can see, the relationship there, there's the line between the design and construction players. So we're collaborating early with design teams and owners. Now, typically a site is selected and, you know, maybe certain things are locked in, but we have greater opportunity based on our experience to leverage, you know, whatever opportunities are out there to kind of deepen that sustainability impact. So again, I am encouraged because of where we're at in this process in some respects, but it's also frustrating to know that a lot of the decisions are kind of locked in by the time we get brought to the table. So just something to think about. Defining sustainability is another important thing, right? If all of us were going to write down a definition for what we define sustainability as, it's all going to be different. That's the for sure. There's going to be certain commonalities and trends, but ultimately we define sustainability, you know, differently based on our experiences and what we're trying to do. I think in general, the conversations I'm in, we hear a lot about lowering operational costs, reducing carbon emissions, being a steward to the environment, but also we hear about healthy buildings and improving occupant health and attracting young, new talent who's interested in sustainability as a topic within their employers. So sustainability really is this broad topic. And I think part of it, as we kind of throw the laundry list of items on what things generally can come up on a building project in this bucket of sustainability, the definition kind of shifts and molds based on the needs of that project. But again, here's just kind of a general overview of a lot of things that come up in these conversations. So again, I know you don't have time to read all that. Okay, so now I want to focus in on carbon reductions in buildings. This was in the description for the session, but I think this data point is super important. 40% of annual carbon emissions globally are tied up in our buildings. So that's the operations and all the materials that we use to build our buildings, right? Concrete, steel, wood, all that stuff. So 40% is a big piece of the pie, right? So how we build matters. A couple other stats that I've shared in other instances before, you know, there's new construction building projects kind of ground up, and then there's renovations and what we do with our existing buildings. On the new construction side, this number always floors me. Global building floor area is expected to double by 2060. So that's the equivalent of an entire new New York City every month for 40 years. So I think that gets to, we need to be doing the things now because the scale of new construction across the globe is just absolutely incredible. On the existing building slide, the data point's a little different. 2/3 of the building stock that currently exists in the world is still going to be here in 2040. So as we think about carbon reductions by 2030, by 2050, and the goals that have been laid out, those buildings are kind of just sitting there, right? If nobody kind of forces a renovation to decarbonize those, they're not going to decarbonize themselves. So existing buildings pose certain challenges, but they're a super important piece of how we, across all the building stock, get ourselves to a decarbonized place. So types of emissions in building, a little definition here. Really, to simplify it, there's two sides of the coin. There's operational carbon emissions and embodied carbon emissions. So I think a lot of us in the building, design, and construction industry and beyond probably default to this operational carbon mindset. And that's tied up in all the systems that consume energy, right? Keeping our heating and cooling systems going, the lights on, heating our water and all that stuff. On the flip side, there's embodied carbon, which is truthfully a kind of an emerging topic, but that's all the carbon emissions related to those building materials that we talked about earlier. And that's the raw material extraction, that's the manufacturing, that's the transport, the installation, and end of life as well. So we're thinking about, and you'll see in the next slides, the two sides of the coin, operational and embodied. So again, focusing on buildings, as we think about a building, say it was built in 2020 is what this graph would represent. This is what a carbon emissions snapshot would look like from the first 30 years. So let's focus on the blue areas first. So every year, right, we spend operational carbon emissions, right? We're using our heating and cooling systems, we're turning the lights on, we're doing all those types of things. Let's say you're a high performing building, maybe you're that shorter blue bar. Maybe you're a less high performing building and you're the bigger bar. Ultimately, you see those bars kind of tapering off over time. That's because the electricity that is given to our buildings from the utility grids is decarbonizing over the next several decades. I know we're not where we want to be in Wisconsin, but that's where things are moving. So that's what you see represented by those blue bars getting shorter. The yellow bars are the embodied carbon side. So I think the scale of the upfront carbon in the initial build of a project is significant. And that's something that I think has really been illuminated in the buildings world here in the last few years. And then they've got a couple other spots maybe where you're doing renovations at different times throughout the building. So if we look and we aggregate those emissions over the first 30 years, for a building that's energy efficient, maybe an elementary school, something relatively simple, you can have as much as half of your carbon emissions tied up in that upfront construction when compared with the operational. So I think these types of stats are I think, shedding a light on that embodied carbon being a really important piece that's been overlooked or less understood in the market for a long time. But there's a lot of buildings that we build, say lab buildings or manufacturing facilities. They have high energy needs based on what they're doing. So the operational piece will obviously be higher, but I think what I'm trying to do at Findorff is just bring more visibility and transparency to what these numbers are in our projects, and they help drive that decision making. The next two slides are for sure too much text to condense, but these two slides were kind of a call to action that myself and a few others did for a presentation at the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council conference a couple of weeks ago. So in general, there's a lot of things we can do, right, to reduce the carbon footprint on the operational side and the embodied side. I think from an operational standpoint, right, what's most important is to understand how your building performs. So for new construction, you can run an energy model. If you're an existing building for your home, right, you can look at your energy bills and see month by month where you are, compare year over year. And then once you have that data, you can start to set those goals and look at, how do I drive efficiency? How do I reduce my use with the things I have to the greatest degree possible? Maybe there's opportunities to electrify. I know there was a session in 2021 as I was going back through the monthly meetings that talked about electrification of buildings. So that's an important piece. And as we think about an electrified grid that is decarbonizing, that's an important piece of the decarbonization puzzle. And ultimately measure and pay attention. If you want to reduce your carbon emissions, you got to pay attention to the data and drive action off of that. On the embodied carbon side, again, this is probably a newer topic to a lot of you. The rule here is less, right? Our carbon emissions are tied up in the quantity of materials that we're using to build our building. So if you can reuse an existing building, if you can reuse certain materials, if you can make the footprint 10,000 square feet smaller than kind of what you would have been doing, right? Those things have the opportunity to just reduce the carbon emissions by the fact that you're using less. And then the second piece of this gets into, well, if you are building new and that's the reality of what you need to do for whatever reason, look at the materials you're using and see where you can decarbonize those just from an options. Maybe concrete A is 10% less than concrete B, right? Start to look at that and make decisions off of it. What I think is important, right, is you look at operational embodied, all the things you can do. The most optimized solution is going to happen as those things start to layer on top of each other. So there's no one and done solution. There's no silver bullet that's going to fix the problem. We got to figure out how these things all work together. I think a good example of that is, insulation, increasing wall insulation, a better R value to improve the energy efficiency of a home, I think is something maybe a lot of people have thought about. But what if the energy benefit in lower energy use doesn't offset the embodied carbon of what it took to make those materials, right? We need to think about this stuff holistically to be able to make decisions that make the most net benefit, right? It's not analyzing things in a vacuum. All right, I think I got a little less than 10 minutes, so I'm gonna transition into our case study. I'm sorry, I'm moving so fast. Four case studies I wanna highlight. So on the operational side, I'd argue this most sustainable building we ever built was the verified net zero energy elementary school in Oregon, Wisconsin. So this is part of the Oregon School District. It's actually in Fitchburg. Verified means it was verified through actual operational data that on an annual basis, they generate as much electricity with the rooftop solar you've seen as that building consumes. So at certain times they may use more, at certain times they may use less, but at aggregate, it offsets everything. This building is all electric. There's no gas connection to the building. So that means all cooking appliances, building heat, water heating is all electrified. They did that with ground source heat pumps. You can see the drill rig on the left side, 99 wells that go down 400 feet into the ground and service the heat and cooling needs for the project. There's 1,704 solar panels on the roof. They're just ballasted on the flat roof. You can see there, it's about a 650 kilowatt array for those of you who like those details. And I think what's important with this drone shot is just to be net zero, we had to cover the entire roof, essentially. This is a 1 and 2 story building. So as you think of like, how much can we offset a 5-story apartment building? You're not going to get to net zero, right? So we think about there's on-site solutions and there's off-site solutions. This was an entirely on-site solution. Oregon also installed a battery backup system. So this is a system that can understand what the array is producing, what the connection to the grid is doing, what the appliances in the building need, and it can deploy electricity strategically in a way that's most cost effective to the district to manage utility demand charges and things. So this is really the only battery project we've done at scale. Just for frame of reference, this is still a new and very emerging technology. The other thing Oregon did very well was they're using this building as a teaching tool. This is a school for kindergarten through 5th graders, I believe. So how do you communicate ground source heat pumps and solar photovoltaic arrays to a 5-year-old, right? Kids are smart, but these are complex topics. So finding ways to clearly communicate what's happening and engage people in the building, I think was something they did super well. If you ever have a chance to get out there, I would strongly recommend it. All right, transitioning, financial case study. So Centro Hispano is another project currently ongoing. Centro Hispano is a 501c3 in Dane County. They service the Latinx community across the county. And they built a new building just off Park Street, down by the Beltline, pretty close to where they were. And sustainability was important to them. It was important to their stakeholders. And so geothermal heat pumps, again, another strategy here, and solar were 2 that we used. One thing why this is a little different, I think we engaged more directly than we ever have in trying to align financial tools to offset as much of the first cost as we could, right? They're a nonprofit, traditional nonprofit who will look for every bucket they can to help fundraise and work towards making this building a reality. So again, a lot of information on this screen. In the big picture, we looked at grants, incentives, and tax credits. So there's some solar-specific grants, the Solar for Good and Madison's program. Focus on energy, I'm sure a lot of you've heard of, utility incentive program that ties to energy efficiency and solar. But look at the Inflation Reduction Act. That's the new federal money that started rolling here in 2023. So we're in the first cycle of that. Overall, and if you add all these together, you get the item in red below, the $533,000 offset. 500,000 of that is coming from the Inflation Reduction Act. So that money is an absolute game changer. One reason is because it allows tax exempt entities to now access what was traditionally a tax credit through a check directly from the federal government. It's called direct pay. So that's $500,000 that wasn't on the table for Centro Hispano a year ago to do these things. Yeah, so I mean, you can see it's still the total cost of the solar and geothermal at 1.58 million. One challenge is you still need that money up front. All the tax credits and incentives come to you in that year after you finish the project. So there's still a financing these solutions, which is an important piece that I don't want to lose sight of. And then the last couple I'll wrap up here pretty quick. Embodied carbon. The picture you see there is the large student housing development on Gorham and State Street in downtown Madison. This was an owner, a developer out of Chicago who has environmental, social, and governance goals as an organization. And this was an opportunity as we were getting to learn more about the embodied carbon piece of the puzzle. As people are getting in, concrete is kind of an easy spot to start. It's a big energy carbon emissions generator in the building sector, and specifically cement. So cement, right, you extract the raw materials, you heat them up to 2000 degrees Celsius, and you create the thing that then turns into cement. So there's a lot of energy tied up in that. So how do you replace cement with other things, reduce the need for cement? Well, there's this new thing that our ready-mix supplier had called an environmental product declaration, which discloses the carbon footprint of 1 cubic yard of concrete. And that environmental product declaration is a piece of data that then we can have a conversation with, right? And we say, all right, we know where the industry averages are. How far can we take this project? This owner is a traditional developer. We were looking at cost neutral options, but by having a proactive conversation with our ready-mix supplier, we were able to reduce the carbon footprint of our concrete structure by 38% over the regional baselines. So again, this is kind of an early data point, but some pretty impactful numbers. The numbers you see on the right are from the EPA greenhouse gas emissions calculator that pumps out a lot of powerful numbers tied to the reductions. So a great win. And again, I think just a small success story, but highlights the opportunity. Again, we can reduce emissions significantly at no cost to projects. And the last one I want to highlight, again, stepping outside of where a contractor we build, we're involved after the design's done or whatever. How do we turn our experience into market leadership? So I had the opportunity to partner with some very smart people who are interested in embodied carbon, and we co-founded the Carbon Leadership Forum Hub of Wisconsin, all sparked by some Girl Scouts, and I see Rachel on the call here. So her daughter just presented on this not that long ago. So the Carbon Leadership Forum Hub of Wisconsin is a regional hub of the Carbon Leadership Forum, who, sorry, I lost the chat. I know that's dangerous. The Carbon Leadership Forum does advocacy, education, and research around embodied carbon. And so we are a regional hub trying to bring those learnings and teachings and drive change in Wisconsin. There's a lot of good things happening, but I think this is just an example of how we're trying to extend how we're involved in the conversation to kind of get outside of that normal process of building a building. So looking ahead, I touched on some of these, and maybe this is better for the Q&A. I think we see a lot of broader corporate strategies around sustainability, and what that means for projects are project-specific efforts to reduce carbon emissions. A lot of people have set these goals, 50% by 2030, carbon neutral by 2050. Still figuring out how to get there, but financial sources are a really important piece of the puzzle, and we're continuing to learn on those. Now, we haven't talked about kind of the regulation, climate disclosure rules and things, and we can get into that in Q&A if there's interest, but there's kind of both sides of it, right? Incentivizing people, but also kind of bringing up those people who aren't going to be doing it by themselves. So sorry for the whirlwind. I'm happy to jump into anything more as part of Q&A.
That was fantastic. And yes, a lot for folks to take on at once, but thank you for sharing the slides so that people can go through that at their leisure afterwards. So I'll invite everybody, if you have questions, feel free to enter them into the chat so we can parse through those. We already have one that I wanted to hitch up with. Ben, what are your thoughts on this? So in the past few years, seen a lot of working from home. How do you think, or how do you see that impacting the need for so much new building?
So I think what we learned in the pandemic was that the corporate office world changed fundamentally, right? And I think that is still a reality. But we saw, again, I showed that slide early on of all the different sectors we worked in. Schools were shut down for a time, but schools aren't going to shut down forever. So we actually saw an uptick in the amount of K-12 work. We saw it as an opportunity to get stuff done while kids were gone. The science and tech world, we worked for some folks who did COVID testing, right? They saw a ramp up in the need. So I think the need isn't uniform. What I think is true is that buildings, and again, you could probably argue with a New York City every month for the next 40 years, but there's going to be some level of new construction. And when we do that, we need to do it right. So I think, who knows where it'll go. I think buildings will play an important role. But to your point, as your home maybe becomes your home space and your workspace, thinking about opportunities to make people happy and carbon, in the carbon sense, being able to do it in a low carbon manner is important.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. Something I probably should have squared away earlier. Is there any contact information that you would want to share, either for Findorff at large or for yourself, if folks want to follow up on things afterwards?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share any, as long as our owners are okay with it. I mean, I'm happy. I think when we have the most impact is when we take those success stories and share them out to the broader world. So yeah, I mean, if there's any questions, I always get a little sheepish when I get introduced and I get called an expert at anything, because we're learning, right? Like Inflation Reduction Act is a perfect example. Nobody's been through a cycle of what this new funding means. We're putting our best foot forward and trying to help our clients align these sources with the things they want to do to provide the most sustainable solution, but there's a lot of learning to be done yet. So I've called out Kathy Kuntz at the Dane County's Office of Energy and Climate Change, and her and I have presented on the IRA a lot in the past, and finding those things where we can kind of partner and teach each other what's working and what's not, I think is important. So I'm sure the interests across this group are broad, and some people you want more depth on certain things. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to share my info and happy to grab a coffee. Keith knows.
It's true. We have a few different questions here regarding one point you hit kind of towards the end of the presentation. You were talking about the one project, a 38% reduction in carbon footprint. You're talking about concrete there. Can you speak a little bit more to the reduced carbon footprint of concrete, or are there just what can you tell us about lower carbon concrete, I guess?
Yeah, so there's things. So there's a lot of action with ready mix suppliers broadly across the country. Concrete is something that's manufactured on a very regional basis, right? There's thousands of concrete suppliers across the country. It's not something like steel where you only have a handful of steel suppliers across the whole country. So I think there's things that individual.
I think we lost your audio, Ben.
Sorry about that. There's a lot of things that individual suppliers are doing that really don't tie directly to our specific project necessarily. We're transporting things with certain types of trucks or vehicles, or we have those facilities that heat, raw materials up to 2,000 degrees. Is there an electrified building versus gas burning versus coal, right? There's like all these different things kind of on how they do their business that tie into the carbon footprint of concrete. And then there's all these things we can do on a kind of a project by project basis, or things if you're pouring a new slab for a driveway for your house or whatever it might be, where you can say, I want more. There's something called SCM, supplementary cementitious materials. And you've probably heard of some of that. So using fly ash, using blast furnace slag, using all these industrial waste products that then can be an input into a concrete mix to replace some of that cement. There's a technology we're using in Milwaukee on a Marquette, the Wellness and Recreation Center right now, called Carbon Cure. And that's where they actually take sequestered carbon emissions and they inject that into the mix at the plant. Now, what that does is causes a chemical reaction, which improves the strength of the concrete. And because it's improved, you can reduce the amount of cement. So there's a lot of new kind of early, mid, and late stage technologies that are all trying to figure it out. But if that's something you're interested in, there's dozens of tools in the concrete world, because truthfully, that's where a lot of people are starting, one from a opportunity to impact. Yeah, it's just the starting point for a lot of people to get into the conversation.
Excellent. And I imagine, folks, if we drill down a little bit further, any minute now, Ben's going to pull out a whiteboard and start drawing chemical equations.
No, that's as far. I got a C in college chemistry. You don't want me to do that.
Let me change tack a bit. You can imagine this one is near and dear to my heart. So we have this fabulous question here. How can we encourage the building community at large to advocate strongly for updating our building and energy codes. Because you had the one slide in there talking about kind of the carrots and the sticks and a little bit about things like BSP. Can you speak to this idea of encouraging the building community?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be direct about the fact that a lot of contractors are only going to do what they're told. And part of that's because if you're situated at a place where your role on a project is just to deliver things that have already been defined, there's just not a lot of incentive. So I guess it's important to think about the broader stakeholders that influence that project, right? So contractors are an important piece. They're the ones who provide pricing to those solutions and the ones that need to do it. But there's design professionals, there's architects and engineers who a lot of times are the first ones kind of offering up solutions to building owners. There's a lot of owners, and we get to, again, there's a big contingent of the people who we work with. The science and tech world is a good one where a lot of the owners are, their headquarters is in Europe. And because of that, they have to do certain things that Europe requires them to do, but that trickles down to their projects in Wisconsin. So that's, again, I think allowing us to see some of these more cutting edge sustainability goal setting efforts because they're trying to match what they're doing in more climate aggressive locations from a policy standpoint than Wisconsin. On the flip side, certain developers, again, because of the financial pro forma that they adhere to, you have to be able to make a bottom line decision at the end of the day. So I think for me, it's like building the case studies and showing that, you can do these and they make sense. On the embodied carbon side, there's cost neutral options. On the energy efficiency side, we're putting solar on 4 of our Findorff buildings next spring largely because the financials make sense. The payback is 5 years. That should be a no-brainer for any business owner. So I think part of it's kind of knowing your audience. I will say I've heard some other very smart people say that the places that have kind of the deepest reach in terms of climate reductions in buildings are the ones with advanced building codes, with certain regulations that require them to do it. That doesn't seem like a reality in the short term for Wisconsin, right? So kind of how can we still advance carbon reductions despite the fact that that's not going to drive the bus, at least not in the short term.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. We have a couple questions here. And one thing I'll suggest, folks, is if you have one that you're considering posting in the chat, please do so. We'll probably stop taking questions soon. We have maybe another 5 or so minutes that we can get some answers. There's a topic here that a few questions hit on, and it's in the space of the construction workers that are needed for building energy efficient buildings. Do you have a take on to what extent our technical colleges are churning out the right folks with the right skill sets to pursue greener building practices?
That's a good question. I've collaborated with, Madison College, Milwaukee Technical College, a variety of different entities within the state, in terms of like within a training program for, building system heating folks. Are they training specifically on geothermal systems as an example, or are we training our electricians to be experts in solar? I don't know directly how well we're doing that. There's a lot of local workforce development organizations and kind of the technical college side as well. I know who are in and around the space, and maybe it goes to the broader piece of, I think the workforce is going to be a broader challenge across the whole spectrum. But that's a good question. And I don't know that I have an answer to how well we're doing it locally. It's an important piece of the puzzle. I can say geothermal on projects in Wisconsin right now is a challenge because there's essentially one driller who we're comfortable using. So when there's only one, right, that can be a cost issue. That can be we don't have the capacity. The IRA now has all this money for ground source heat pump system and we can't pump it out fast enough. So that's another example there of if there's demand, maybe the training and the expertise can follow as well. I'll put that on my list as a follow-up.
That's a great point. I appreciate that. Only one source for doing the drilling for geothermal. Wow. Okay. Question for you about resources for renters. We have renters who would love to advocate for upgrades to their buildings. right? So this goes into the span of, I'm probably talking more about, this is the operational side, I assume, or some sort of renovation down the line. Can you speak to the renters in the audience?
I can. I don't know that my depth of expertise is going to give them what they want. What I can say is that I was actually talking to Kathy Kuntz after this presentation we did at the Wisconsin Sustainable Business Council. I think she said, like, this isn't rent, but condo associations were one example of where it's really difficult to, leverage some of these funds or advocate for solar just in terms of how the agreements are set up. Ultimately, if you're a renter, you're probably going to be limited in certain ways in terms of what you can do. There's power in numbers. So finding, if you're in a multi-unit building and seeing if by committee, things could be brought up and socialized with the property owner, might be one way to do it. Looking at other opportunities or success stories locally. That's another one. I'd be happy to scratch that one and follow up with the group. I don't have the three examples to shout out now, but I'd be happy to circle back and provide some context for who might be doing it or doing it successfully.
Appreciate that. All right. Well, while you're getting that down, I guess we'll hit you with this last question, then we'll try and wrap up here. Your role in sustainability at Findorff, fantastic that it even exists. Where are similar roles, similar counterparts in the building space? Are there other local builders that have similar roles in sustainability, such as yours?
So in terms of commercial contractors in the state of Wisconsin, I know of one other company that has a sustainability person with it in the title, right? Every contractor is maybe meeting the need of a LEED certified building somehow, whether they're hiring that out externally or kind of figured out internally, but there's only two, myself and one other that I know of on the commercial side. I don't know of anyone on the residential side. So is that what was the question there, Keith? Was it just?
Yeah, it was really saying, hey, is Findorff the only one?
Yeah.
Right.
So again, we're in a small company there. When I look broadly across the country to say where could Findorff sustainability program go, there's contractors, national contractors who have a team of a dozen sustainability folks, because as you get into the carbon emissions tracking on a company-wide and on a project-wide basis, it's an immense amount of data to manage. So we're hiring through the UW's business internship program through the Nelson Institute an intern for the summer who's going to help us take on some of that short-term need, but we're looking to build capacity internally for what we're doing because we're seeing the need for it.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks so much. I know we went a little bit longer because we had a little bit of flexibility in the schedule, but thank you for taking the time to answer so many people's questions. And I believe we have the possibility to do maybe some breakout room action later on. Is that right, Julia?
Yes, that's right, Keith. And there were so many people I think joined just to hear this talk, and we have fewer announcements than normal, maybe because some of us saw each other at Giving Tuesday. So I thought we could take up more Q&A now. Thank you so much, Ben, for coming, and thank you, Keith, for connecting with Ben and bringing him here to speak with us. So we're going to now. Susan, if you could back up the slides, we're going to do some short team updates, and then we will have breakouts where we can have more Q&A for those that want to go even deeper into sustainable building. I'm not actually seeing the slide, Susan. I'm seeing a dark screen. There we go. So the first announcement is from the Art Collective and Divest and Defund teams. And this is late breaking news. We've just decided to do a caroling for the climate. It will be on Saturday, December 16th at Hilldale Mall. We'll meet at 11:30 in a corner of Metcalf's Market. We'll be singing familiar tunes. but the lyrics will be a little bit different than you're used to. And those of you that have seen past work by Diane and Russ, just wait till you get to hear them. We're going to put a sign up sheet, sign up Google Doc in the chat. And I know some people, you also can write divest.defund@350wisconsin.org. I know 2 people have already written, and I'm going to send you back the sign up sheet so you can sign up. The last thing I'll say, we're particularly looking for carolers. If you really are not a singer, you can either lip sync, or we will have people handing out candy canes. We'll have a couple of banners, although we're keeping it much more festive, at least at the beginning as we go through the mall. We will end up at Chase Bank, still the #1 funder of fossil fuels, and we may be slightly less festive when we get to the bank itself. Diane or Russ, did you want to add anything to that announcement?
No, just come and join us. We're going to have a good time. That's all I would say.
We have had lots of interest already, and so we do think it's going to be fun. Next slide. And I think this will be Phyllis making this announcement.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. I'm just standing in for Brittany, who couldn't be here. So
yes, I should have said Phyllis with the tar sands team.
thank you. As many people may know and others not, we're fighting line 5 of Enbridge, and we had a blow last week. Michigan Public Service Commission approved an Enbridge line 5 permit for a tunnel under the Straits of Mackinac. And if you want to know just how bad that is, go to Oil and Water Don't Mix. They have so many experts who have explained how very dangerous this tunnel would be. So as it says here, it's drawing outrage from tribes and environmental groups, us among them. The Public Service Commission of Michigan did approve the permit with some conditions. Enbridge must receive all governmental approvals, because that's not the only one they need. No third-party utilities can be run through the tunnel. Enbridge must provide a risk management plan, and more robust testing and construction practices must be conducted. But none of that makes me feel better, because those are all kind of weaselly that you can get around. So it's really important that they not get the rest of their permits. Go on to the next slide, please. And what you can do is not, it's working on line 5. This is going through the Straits of Mackinac is one place, and then the other place is they want to go around the Bad River Reservation, as you see here with the dotted black line. And the red line there is the current route, and it has some very dangerous spots in it, which any day now could rupture and pour oil into Lake Superior. So we have a petition, and now it just recently went digital. And so I think it has already gone into the chat. Yes. Sign the petition to the Army Corps of Engineers. Go there. And I really encourage you to write at least a sentence or 2 at the beginning. There is a whole, letter written for you, but it's much more interesting to the PSC, or to the Army Corps, excuse me, to anybody, when they see that people took the time to write their own thoughts and reasons for being against a permit. Where it says, sign the petition telling the Army Corps of Engineers to conduct a full EIS, environmental impact statement, on line 5. They don't have to do one. They can just do a little mealy mouth thing. And we really need them to do the full EIS on line 5. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Phyllis, for stepping in. I know Brittany is traveling to DC, and Emily Park, our co-executive director, is homesick. So thank you for stepping in, Phyllis. Next slide, I'm happy to introduce Stephanie Robinson, our other co-executive director, who has good news for us, I think.
I do. Thank you so much, Julia, and really great to be with you all tonight. It's my pleasure to tell you that we had a tremendous Giving Tuesday campaign this year, and we're able to exceed our fundraising goal of $25,000 fairly significantly. So thank you all to all of our supporters, all of you here. this really gets us off to a great start with our end of year fundraising campaign. Giving Tuesday kicks it off, but our total goal for end of year, so we can continue to do this important work, is $60,000. And you can see Giving Tuesday got us almost 50% of the way there, which is really exciting. But if we're going to keep having wins like we just had at the Public Service Commission, where we were able to protect solar net metering, and where we can continue to fight Line 5 and hopefully shut it down in Wisconsin, we really need everyone's support to meet our year-end goal. We also just had a fabulous celebration with great solidarity and community last week at Garver Feed Mill. We exceeded last year's attendance. We had about 116 people. It was just phenomenal. And one of the highlights was sharing 2 new videos, which you can find on our YouTube page. And I encourage you, if you haven't seen them, to check them out. Many thanks to the Art Collective for the Protect All the Waters video, which is really, really just incredibly moving to watch, and really addresses the Line 5 issue. And then we also did a 2023 year in review video, highlighting all of our tremendous advocacy and activism. And that was put together by our development manager, Kristen Clark. So many thanks to her as well. Also wanted to share, this was our first year having corporate sponsorships, and we had 5 this year. It was very exciting, and just tremendous support from local businesses. Over 65 local businesses supported our Giving Tuesday silent auction, which is just tremendous, tremendous support from businesses locally and throughout the state. We had over 140 items in our silent auction, which was really, really wonderful. And because we had so many this year, we do still have a few that are still without bids. So we are doing a last chance silent auction, and we are keeping that open to Wednesday night. There are 17 items there. Next slide. And this is just to give you a little bit of a taste, to check it out. Lots of great gift ideas, some wonderful works of art. And for those of you who are making changes in your own lives to reduce your carbon emissions, just want to highlight that we have a great membership to Greenbox, an annual membership that's really pretty heavily discounted now to get home compost, and 2 annual passes to B-Cycle. Next slide. So just quickly, a few more of the items that are still available for bid. Just would encourage you to check them out. And again, thanks so much to everyone for celebrating with us last week and helping us reach our Giving Tuesday goal. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Stephanie, and everyone who worked on Giving Tuesday, which is a lot of us, but some worked harder than others. So thank you to everyone for that. Next slide, I think, is going to be Maddie. Let me see the slide. And yes, Maddie, you're going to make this announcement. Maddie is our office administrator, which means she does a little bit of everything.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Julia. Staff office hours are tomorrow, Tuesday, December 5th, 3 to 5 p.m. I'll be hosting office hours this time around. Basically, it's a time where you can drop in to talk through ideas, give feedback, ask a question, or just say, hey. These will typically be on the 4th Tuesday of the month from 3 to 5, but due to the holidays of November and December, we're doing a combined one, and that will be taking place tomorrow. So I'm going to put in the chat a link to our public meeting calendar. You can find the Zoom information there, and also a link where you can add the calendar event to your own personal calendar. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Maddie. Next slide, I think, will be for me to tell you that we will be meeting. We meet monthly. We will not meet on January 1st. So we're not the first Monday, but the second Monday in January. We will have Heather Phelps will be speaking to us. She's right now in Dubai as an NGO observer. And she'll come back and give us a firsthand account of what it was like to be there. And if you don't want to wait until January 8th, she is part of a group called the Christian Climate Observer Program, and she and others in that group are writing a daily newsletter, and you can subscribe and maybe you'll hear from her or from others. And that will, like this meeting, will be Zoom only. Next slide. So I think we can stop the recording now. We're